Hello and welcome to Cultural Economy in the Kitchen, the podcast from the Journal of Cultural Economy's editorial collective. I'm Dr. Addie McGowan, Research Associate in Market Studies at the University of Salford's Business School and Reviews and Online Content Editor for the JCE.
And I'm Professor Philip Roscoe, Professor of Management at the University of St Andrews Business School. And I'm Co-Editor-in-Chief of the JCE.
Today is our final episode of the first season of this podcast, so thanks so much for hanging in there with us as we try out this new format for academic content. So today we thought we would end with something a little different and focus on two books recently reviewed by the JCE, to really inspire your summer beach reading list while you're taking a little break from work. Right, Philip?
That's right.
They both
explore. Addie knows I hate beaches, except for cold Scottish ones.
Well, these will be perfect for cold Scottish beaches. Anyways, both books explore a particularly rich site where cultural production and economic activity meet, which is marketing. They go beyond what marketing is and into what marketing people do. So today we're joined by Kevin Mellet, author of Marketing, A Sociological Approach, which is out in 2025 in the English translation with Polity Press. JCE Review Symposium will also be out soon and includes reviews by Yesem Akmaraner-Kott, Stefan Schwarzkopf, and Robert Cluley. Speaking of Robert, we also have him joining us today. So in addition to grilling Kevin, we'll ask him to discuss his 2024 book, Marketing Science Fictions, out with Bristol University Press, which I recently reviewed for the Journal.
Phew, what a lineup. So let's get on with it. Kevin, can you introduce yourself and tell us where you're joining us from?
Yeah, hello everyone. So I'm joining you from my living room here in Paris because today is a holiday, so my office is closed and I'm very close to my kitchen also, which you cannot see, but anyway. So I'm in Paris and I'm actually an associate professor of sociology at Sciences Po here in Paris.
Wonderful. And could you tell us what you've been cooking lately in your kitchen?
Well, today, weather is not great in Paris, but, it's spring, and so we are craving for raw vegetables. So I have cooked some Greek menu, quite simple, with feta and tomatoes and tabbouleh and hummus and tzatziki. And also, of course, so we're in France, so a plate with my favorite cheese. Comté, Saint-Nectaire, crottin de Chavignol, and Théoulet. Some charcuterie for the kids.
This is what happens when you ask a Parisian to tell you about their little quite simple déjeuner.
What did you expect?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'd have been disappointed otherwise.
Well, Robert, can you please introduce yourself and tell us where you're joining us from today?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Dr. Robert Cluley, Associate Professor of Marketing at Birmingham University Business School currently. I'm joining you from the Midlands in England, so Loughborough specifically, which is a town which is very hard to spell and very hard to say for non-natives. And I'm here in my bedroom, believe it or not.
And what have you been cooking in your Loughborough kitchen lately?
Well, so I have two young children, so mainly it's soups, things like that. But I did have a night off, so I treated myself to a roast lamb with halloumi, also with a Greek sort of flavour. So you put some lemon on it and it's very good.
Oh, yum.
Very nice. Very nice. And I have to say, so this is the last episode in the series. This is the 16th one we've done, and we haven't as yet asked Addie that same question. And she didn't know this is coming, actually. Otherwise, she'd have been whistling up delicacies last night to brag about. Right. Addie, what have you been cooking in your kitchen recently?
Actually, kind of like Kevin, not cooking, but assembling raw ingredients. I've been really on a smoothie kick lately. So I've been using frozen berries and yogurt and chia seeds and flax seeds and things like that, trying to up my nutrient intake in the morning before I have coffee, because I think that that's, helpful for the stress levels in academia these days. So smoothies, frozen smoothies.
Frozen smoothies. Is it possible to make a roast lamb and halloumi smoothie is what I want to know. Anyway.
I mean, it's possible, but you just don't want to do that.
So this is what we've got for today. And if you think it sounds good, that's the intellectual content and not the culinary lineup, which sounds wonderful. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons, as we'll be starting season 2 after the summer break, and you don't want to miss out. let's get going.
All right. So, Kevin, we'll start with you. Thanks so much for being here today on a holiday in France, no doubt. So we really appreciate it. It's really great to see you. And it was a delight also to read your book and to organize the review symposium for the journal about it, too. So your book draws on a big picture map of the sociology of marketing, of course, a field guide, so to speak, of the social science contributions to how we understand marketing pretty much from the past 40 years or so of scholarship, which is fantastic. So can you start us off by introducing the project of the book as you see it in your own words, including maybe what inspired it and why you saw a need for it?
Well, yeah, for sure. It's marketing has not been my first focus. I was actually a scholar in digital markets, working in a telecom company. And there I have studies like many market devices, like online consumer reviews, job boards, or digital advertising. And I came to see the market as an organized activity with people, with the material stuff and intermediaries. So I was there, and then I was recruited at Sciences Po here in Paris and started to be involved in a master's degree in marketing, where I have taught students, and I have developed this course on the sociology of marketing. And of course, came the idea to develop a little bit further from my initial specialty or like basis. And I have tried to read a lot, but there is a lot also I have not read. But anyway, and that's how the project developed. And so the question for me was, what would a sociologist have to say about marketing? And I came to this question, which is quite a little bit different, which is, how did sociologists get into marketing? From an empirical perspective. And so I identified, that's the first chapter of the book, three main, let's say, debates or theoretical questions and topics that were at the center of empirical inquiries into marketing as an activity, as a profession, etc. So maybe I can just tell about these three different debates. So the first conversation concerns culture, and it's really a reaction to the critical theory that was inspired by the Frankfurter School, and also the critique of the consumer society by, Adorno, Horkheimer, and Marcuse, and Baudrillard, and so on, and which presented marketing, advertising, and the cultural industries like an engineering, very powerful engineering that succeeded in constructing an artificial culture. So starting from the late 70s and early 80s, scholars took interest in looking at this cultural in industries and marketing, but with a more empirical view. And the idea was also to show that these people are not that powerful in manipulating people, and it is also like an ordinary activity. And as part of the cultural term, which is very familiar to people here in the UK and in the JCE, there was this idea to look at advertising agencies, people in advertising agencies and its marketing department as cultural producers and cultural intermediaries, which have also difficulties to practice and build culture and to interact with consumers and society. So that's the first discussion and conversation about culture. The second one, which is the one I come from, is linked to the market and to the sociologist as having a critical view on the economist's view of the market and the formal view of the market. And here you will look at the market with all these people who are working on a daily basis to let the market work very basically. And these people are working in retail and merchandisers, and they are working in advertising, but also working on the product and packaging and so on. And all these people all together are like looking towards to the market exchange as the end of their work. And looking at these people is also reconnecting to the etymology of marketing, which is the market, and looking at this market work, how you work, how all those people and also consumers work to let the market work. So that's the second discussion and conversation, which led to the study, the empirical study of marketing. And the third conversation revolves around the production and the productive activity within organization, within firms. And here it's the question of the nature of business as an organizational phenomenon. Because above all, marketing is a form of organized action within companies. It's like the department, the marketing department, And here it's very interesting from an historical perspective to look how marketing has emerged as a kind of power source within the companies, within the firms, but also fighting with other sources of power. Actually, marketing has developed its legitimacy by saying that there were like legitimate forces to speak about the consumer, to know the consumer, to represent the consumer within the firm. And that's the way they were able to talk to engineers and say, engineers, your product is brilliant, it's a great innovation, but maybe people will not understand how to use it, what to do with it, and maybe we have to work together. So against the engineers, but also against the sellers. And there's this conversation within marketing by Mellet and Roscoe saying how sellers were bad people and marketers were great people. And it's very interesting because then you will look at marketing as organized activity within the organization. So to sum up, and I would say that the distinctive feature of marketing and what makes it very particularly interesting to study is that it lies at the intersection of the productive organization, markets, and culture.
So just to bring Robert in briefly, because your review, which isn't published yet, but is coming out, it was a very nice review, starts off with this kind of a side of, the very mixed feelings of discovering that somebody else has written a book that you wanted to write.
Yes.
I mean, does this chimes with your understanding of the state of things?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think Kevin's book very skillfully navigates what is a very fractured terrain and does a great job of showing the importance of marketing, which, coming from a marketing research background, one of the challenges that we have a lot of the time is convincing people that marketing's important, because it's seen as the kind of, I think that the Marx quote would be the sort of frim-fram of capitalism. Like, it's not as important as actually like profit. It doesn't really do anything. It just helps stuff move around. But Kevin's work, I think, really neatly opens up some of the different ways that people have thought about that moving around, and shows what I took from it. And I've taken a lot of quotes that are going to be, the start of my paper submissions to the JCE very soon from Kevin's book, around the importance of understanding it as an organised activity and an activity which organises as well. And that sort of the two dimensions of marketing, I think, is perfect.
So can I just follow up on that a little bit more out of curiosity and ask the two of you? So, I mean, both of you are professional marketing academics in a way, but you're not what I would regard as mainstream marketing scholars who are interested in those kind of things. Where do those group of sort of classic business school marketing scholars fit into this world of where people are doing things in markets?
I'll go first. I think one of the very strange things that I've observed as a marketing academic is that most marketing academics don't really care a lot about marketing and marketers as practitioners. And they'll often say that they do, but they genuinely have no idea what they do. Where Kevin's description of it as an organised activity of people and things. Most, papers in the mainstream marketing journals don't talk about the people or things or the organisation at all. Which is quite a strange phenomenon, really, that the thing which the supposed, like you say, the mainstream business marketing academics you would think would be really focused on is just not there. And actually what's more common is statements by them of the fact that they never talk about marketing. So there's been quite a few recent contributions in some of the leading marketing journals, like the Journal of Marketing, where people write and say, why do we never understand marketing in the wild? Why do we never go and look at what marketers are doing? But then they never do it either, which is a curious,
that
curious
sounds like
thing.
a citation. That's a citation gouging strategy, isn't it? As following Cluley's call for an engagement, etc. It's ref bait.
Yeah, I mean, I've
Yeah.
wondered this, and I wonder what Kevin's thoughts are. So one of the really pivotal moments in marketing, in analysis of marketing, was Vance Packard in the 1950s, who wrote this very critical account of marketers as the kind of arch hidden manipulators. And what that kicked off, I think, was an account of actually just describing what marketers do and say as being a critique in its own right. Because by all accounts, what Packard did was just go and interviewed some marketers. And they were salesmen, right? They were trying to make out that they were really powerful and really manipulative and really important because they were trying to promote themselves. And he just published that. And it made them look really evil. But I think what it's ended up doing then is, for many, from a sort of almost political perspective, just describing what marketers do is often seen as a critical act, because you're either saying, look how manipulative they are, or they're not actually that manipulative at all. And as Kevin said, that they're people with all these flaws trying to just do their best and, figure stuff out. And the mainstream marketing research community doesn't like either of those, because it either says that they're not that important or they're really manipulative. And that's my suspicion. So you get this in marketing. I think it's quite unique, this notion of description as being critique. And I found that personally with my work.
Yeah, Kevin, how would you respond to that?
I just want to say that I'm a little bit uncomfortable with this discussion, because I'm not a marketer, and I'm not a marketing scholar, and I'm not in the field of marketing. So I was really trained as an economist, and then in economic sociology, and then I was recruited in Sciences Po, which is like a French LSE, London School of Economics, with so scholars in history, economics, law, and political science and sociology, but no management scholars, actually. So Sciences Po has a business school, but no management scholar. So I'm like in a very uncomfortable position. So of course they have like marketing teachers who come from business school and they teach. But I want the students to have this kind of different approach, which is really grounded in history and sociology and so on. But then when the book was published, I had occasion to present my book to marketing scholars in France, and it was they were like, interesting, okay, and yeah, goodbye. So that was it. It really did not stick, It like there was this like reflexive view, but from the outside, and they were like, okay, we would expect more like. I don't know, advice about how to go, where we want to go, to be more responsible and to be like more environment conscious, because we as marketing scholar, we are super environment conscious, but our students are not. And how do we manage to help them be more? And maybe they thought the book would help, but it did not really. And so, yeah, I think it does not work very well.
I think for me, I loved both of your books and putting you in conversation together in this wave of sociology marketing scholarship, because my first career was in marketing. So I've worked for years, and I mean, over a decade now, as a digital strategist in an advertising agency. So Robert, as I wrote in my review about your book, everything you captured really was so fun for me to read, because it was like going back into my days at the agency, which was fantastic. And I really loved it. And I still do marketing work today. And Kevin, too, your sociological questions about marketing were the ones that I was asking in the conversations I had with my fellow marketers. And so when I then came into academia, it was so interesting that the practitioner work that I did, I initially discounted it a little bit, but I was encouraged by scholars like yourself and Donald McKenzie to lean into my autoethnographic expertise around the discipline, because that just hadn't really been accounted for very much in scholarship. So let's get into that conversation a little bit more. So Kevin, and you said this initially, but you reject that classic criticism of marketers manipulating consumers, which, and Robert, really fantastic point about Packard interviewing marketers and advertising people, because it was like a pitch. I'm sure, we needed to sell what we were selling, and that's convincing, absorbing the uncertainty of clients that we can actually do this job. But you debunk that a bit, Kevin, by bringing this scholarship together that says otherwise, and focusing on the daily work of marketers. So not what they say they do, but what they really do. So you propose to examine marketing, a quote, and I quote, its professionals and their tools based on what they develop and manipulate in their activity. So not manipulating consumers necessarily, but manipulating other things, by manipulating people indirectly in the forms of graphics, figures, lists, etc. So Robert, we'll get into your book and how you describe that in a little bit. But Kevin, you argue that marketers do manipulate knowledge, signs, and management tools, which I thought was just a fantastic framing of that, which loosely structure the chapters of the book. So let's get into that just a little bit. The shared history of marketing and sociology, from the perspective, Kevin, of consumers, and thinking about how production of knowledge of consumers is done by marketers. So not manipulating them, but producing knowledge about them, with this particular scientific approach to marketing, to building knowledge about customers and the market. So, Robert, again, the market research in your book goes deeply into this. So, Kevin, can you expand a bit on your observation that, and I quote, the invention of marketing is linked to the creation of a specific kind of knowledge?
Well, sure. So, as you said, I think it's very important to think in terms of marketing, and that's really what Robert does in his book. That marketing is work. It's like people doing stuff in organization, and also building stuff and manipulating stuff. And so that's the idea of this knowledge instruments and tools. When we think in terms of knowledge, it's really interesting to look from a historical perspective at how marketing has emerged from an organizational perspective as building its legitimacy on the knowledge of the market, but the knowledge of the market as being consumers, like the demand. And they built this legitimacy with the use of tools which were like developed at that time and were part of the social science in general. And they were also part of what we would call today statistics and public statistics. All this altogether developed in the 1930s and 40s and 50s. And there was no clean separation between what you would call sociology, and then what you would call public statistics, and then what you would call market research. All those people, they work together, they develop tools together, and you have important figures like Paul Lazarsfeld or Jean Stutzel in France, which was very important. And so that's the very important source of how it developed, and also the variety of kind of knowledge devices and methodologies that were used at the time. So you have the questionnaire built on a representative sample, but you have also the focus group, which is, when you think in terms of manipulating people, is very fascinating, but because it's really like the device where you will take consumers and put them in a box, in a room, but you will not manipulate them. On the contrary, you will try to make that very artificial device let them speak as naturally and as possible. So it's very interesting. And so you have a lot of methodologies that have developed over time. And of course, when you look from a historical perspective, this market research has over time separated from sociology and social science, and developed its own expertise and its own relationship with the clients, which are private or public.
Can I just push you a little bit further? I mean, one of the things that we know from the kind of market studies, theology of markets tradition, is that knowledge is, in all its forms, is performative, right?
Yeah.
So this is, I mean, you're talking about how marketing marketers have constructed specific kinds of knowledge, but that's not an inert process, is it? I mean, they're kind of constructing the consumers and the markets as they construct that knowledge.
Of course, if you think in terms of who were the people that you had to interview, it was like very shortly they came to the idea that they need to interview housewives and women, and it was like obviously a way to build the figure of the housewife consumer who is responsible for buying the kind of stuff that is advertised and sold in the retail market. So it's really performative in the way it identifies, classifies, and categorizes the kind of people who are interesting and relevant, and the way you will think in terms of a society which is also like a middle-class society where people are consumers and can be segmented and differentiated, but mostly all consuming in a way or in another. So it's also a very homogeneous society in a way that was built, but it was a society that was also very relevant if you look at historical work from Liz Cohen for the US, for example, on the Consumer Republic, which was very coherent with the political vision in general of that society as a consumer and as a consuming society.
Well, I think that brings us really nicely to then kind of your next point as you build the Empire of Science, your chapter 3 discussion, where you explore that opposite approach, knowledge about the customer, the consumer, that can be performative, to then look at marketing's practice of directing products to those people. And I think that might actually be a component of that performativity in action. So can you give us a brief overview of this work? How marketers attach new qualities to products, communicate them, and then circulate them. What role do they play in developing that value of products, and what's sociological here? And you can just give a brief example.
Yeah, sure. Well, I don't know if I can say it better than you did. So, so marketers, attach qualities to products to differentiate them on the market, and also they build brands, and they attach stories and narratives to these brands, also to differentiate them and to let them be memorable in the marketplace. And then with all this, they build up science. They participate in the semiotics of the market, so to writing stories, to building images, and so on. And I think it's very important to understand that it is not like a trivial work. It's really linked to a large variety of specialties which need to coordinate. And it's a lot of work. It doesn't work all the time. And so you can explain also failures. And it's also important to understand how it evolves over time. And I think we are also today in an interesting period, because we can see that brands are trying to build more and more complex narratives about themselves, about who they are, and so on. So there is this idea of the reflective brand, looking at its past and at itself with an heritage, and how you build about this heritage to tell stories, or how you will also link yourself to values and to so what counts for people, but in terms of not only its functional, or it's like standard, but also it's environmental friendly, it's healthy, it's safe, it's privacy relevant, and so on. So that's very interesting. And if I want to take an example, a recent example, I will think about the Barbie film, which it's a brilliant example. And here we can link to the cultural economy, very clearly, because it's a film by a female director, Greta Gerwig, who is also an independent filmmaker with a lot of legitimacy, but it's also a product, the Barbie. And that sets out to stage, this, and reconstruct the narrative around the Barbie. which appears like feminist icon in the film. And you see really in the process of making this film and watching it, this process of rewriting the kind of narrative of the Barbie as a feminist icon, which is not, evident because it's a very sexualized doll, and so I think it's very interesting because here you have like a success, but of course you have a lot of failures also in terms of more than brands and logos and images. You have also this idea to use Boltanski's and Esquer's work to enrich the commodity, to enrich the good, and to make it more valuable in the eyes of consumers. And this is like very interesting work to look at, I think.
Yeah. And I think that answer kind of dances around, your then conversation around morality and marketing. So bringing the moral into the marketing. And so you open up that can of worms in chapter 5. Can you give a brief overview, I guess maybe extending what you were just saying into how marketing is involved in processes of moralization, perhaps an illustrative example? I know you just talked about Barbie, but anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I could start from another example.
Sure.
If we think in terms of the environment and the green transition, I think it's interesting because here we see that businesses and companies engage with this transition, and they can use marketing. And it's like if you take public bodies, like in France, we have the ADEME, which is the French Environment Agency. They have like advertising campaigns to mobilize people toward the transition towards more responsible consumption. And in 2023, there was this campaign on TV, which featured scenes in retail shops. And in one of them, you had this customer and asking the salesperson, between these two shirts, which one would you prefer? And the salesperson says, I'm not a seller. I'm a devendeur, an unseller or de-seller. I don't know how to say it in English.
Yes.
You better buy neither of those, and because maybe you don't need them, because maybe it's better for the planet and so on. And this was this commercial, which was like, okay, part of this, and it's very interesting because it provoked an important public controversy. People from the commercial retail sector like complain and say it was like a humiliation for them to see them like mocked, and they asked the Ministry of the Economy to forbid and let the advertising go out, and that was public outcry, but also people defending the campaign, saying that it's important to. And so here you see that different aspects of this moral and morality issue revolving around marketing. First, marketing can be thought about as toolbox, and this is really Kotler's view on social marketing and broadening the concept of marketing, the idea that this toolbox can be used to help for various causes, and maybe larger causes than only profit. And then you have also this idea that the environment, ecology, and that's what I said before, is a value. It's a principle on which people invest, and which is an important general interest issue, but it's also a value that can be used and managed by brands and by companies. But when they start using the green value, they also move from the space of only the market to also the space of potential public controversy. And what you see with the ADEME, which faced a backlash from the people who talked about the general interest, which was the interest of retail commerce, which was suffering because of Shein and Temu and online commerce and so on. And they defended other important principles. But also when Total and other petroleum company, oil companies, try to start to develop a new branding, changing their name, changing their brands, presenting themselves as energies in the plural companies who are developing. They expose themselves also to this public outcry and to controversy. They enter the public space, and that I think it's very important, because we tend to think in terms of there is the space of the public space and the space of politics and political issues on the one hand, and there is the state of the economy and the business and consumers on the other hand. While when looking, and that's what I try to do in this chapter, more closely, you will see that it's interconnected, that in externalities are on the overflows, to use Michel Calon's word, are all over the place, and it's so then you will need to have a more precise thinking in terms of where does value takes its value from values, and what does it mean.
So I can see Robert chuckling away through that, and I think it ties very nicely to Robert's work, because I mean, you know, in a sense, what you're talking about is how we narrate values and the discourses of sort of ethics, and what is economic and what is cultural, all of these kind of things that are meat and drink to this journal. But Robert's work is called Marketing Science Fictions, the book, and I think it leads us very nicely. So I want to ask you, Robert, to tell us a little bit about what led you into the work and so forth. But before we even get there, tell us a little bit about that title. I think it needs a bit of unpacking. What are these marketing science fictions, and how does it speak to what the central argument of the book is?
Yeah, so it's not the best title, I admit, because it's somewhat unintentionally confusing.
Title.
I love it.
It's a great title.
One of the things which we find when we look at marketing knowledge is that it likes to present itself as a kind of science, and it draws in on all kinds of sciences. But so this is kind of where I approached the field. So in my book, write about my opportunity to go work in a marketing company. And my assumption was that I was going to see all kinds of scientific practices, all kinds of quantitative practices, all kinds of computational practices. And I did see some of them, but they were used in a very unscientific way. They tended to be used in a way which I felt was far more akin to a creative process. And I came to suspect that what was happening was the kind of cultural production that Kevin talked about earlier on as one of the key features of marketing was still happening, just with the signifiers of science, and in particular computational or data science. You know, now we hear a lot about algorithms and AI. It was that kind of stuff. So the title was really trying to play on the idea of marketing science as being a science fiction. And when I started to think about it in those terms, the notion of the science fiction, the notion of the future society, is typically a dystopian, a controlled society. It's usually some kind of vision of a society where the market reigns supreme. And it came to me as I spent time in the field that that's actually, there's many ways to understand markets and marketing. But for me, the key analytical lens was uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
That the main problem facing markets on both sides is uncertainty. Buyers, am I going to get what I paid for? Sellers, what do the buyers actually want to pay us for? And marketers were really sat in that nexus of trying to absorb or to shape or to minimize that uncertainty. So the marketing science fiction then is a play on marketing science and the science fiction and all that's in between, I guess. So yeah, that's sort of the title. But I have subsequently had invitations to go and talk to publishers about how to sell science fiction books, which I'm not remotely qualified to do.
Yes,
that's great.
I would take them up just for the free sandwiches.
Yeah, I was thinking that might be volume 2. Might be.
I mean, one of the things as well is there's a kind of, you could be a bit reflexive about about this notion because, of course, the marketing practitioners are themselves in a market for marketing services as well. So there's this kind of meta science fictioning of what it is that they're doing. But what was it like? I mean, you discuss this in the book, and we've talked about it in person before. I've seen you present this work, but tell us what it was like in this place, day to day at the agency you call Super. What did you do? What did they do?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll just take it a step back, actually, if that's okay.
Yeah, please do.
So the way that I got into this company called Super was a bit like Kevin. I'd been asked to start teaching some marketing courses that I wasn't 100% qualified to teach. So I started going and hanging out with marketers, and marketers are a great community because they're selling, they're marketing themselves. And so I'd go to various events and workshops and industry trade shows and things. And I just kind of talked to people, and eventually a conversation just led to somebody I thought was interesting. And I said, do you think I could come and work for you guys for free? This is a character that in the book I describe as Dan, although that wasn't his real name. And he said, yeah, like, we're a really open company. You were a university. We want to advertise that we work with people from universities because it makes us look good. So come along. So I had the chance then to go and start working for this company called Super, which was a strange company. Even having spent 14 months studying it, I'm not 100% sure I know how to describe it, or really sort of how they made their money in some respects, because they were part marketing research company, part advertising agency, part technology company, part sort of legal services media company. And it was a very strange experience actually walking in, because what they did was very uncertain, but how they did it was very familiar. It was very familiar. So the head offices was in a very artistic, creative quarter of a large European capital city, where there were lots of other buildings and offices that looked exactly like their building and offices, and lots of other marketing and creative workers that looked exactly like the kinds of creative workers that worked at Super. So it was very familiar to me, and very familiar in terms of the kind of cultural representations that you see of advertising agencies. There was the classic kind of slide in the reception area, and kitchen with smoothies that you could go and help yourself to. But on a daily basis...
smoothies, no.
No. Not that I tried anyway. But on a daily basis, for all of that, most of what we did was just sit at laptops, not talking to each other, typing and creating things, or sat at laptops talking to each other on our laptops, even though we were all in the same building. That happened quite a lot as well. So I was able to spend time as a unpaid, and I should emphasize unpaid, junior executive in their insights and analytics group. So I was doing research. And one of the things which really struck me when I was there was it was very familiar. So they were doing surveys of consumers. They would show people adverts and ask them how much they liked them, which is exactly the kind of things that my colleagues do in marketing departments in business schools. But they did it at such speed. It was incredible how fast they would turn these things around. Projects which I would have thought would have taken my students 3 months and my colleagues maybe 12 months if they could get funding for it, they were doing them in 24 hours. And I was just amazed at this. It was very clear that it was an industrial process. And that's what I then tried to sort of figure out in the book, was how was this industrial process organized, but also how did they convince other people that it wasn't an industrial process? How did they convince them that there was some magic to it? And that's where the idea of the kind of fiction, the science fiction, the creativity started to come in. And I saw that there were lots of elements of marketing work which are really, in fact, I might even go as far as to say almost most marketing work isn't really concerned with consumers at all. It's concerned with clients. It's concerned with convincing clients to pay them to do research, to pay them to develop adverts, to pay them to place adverts. And I should point out here, when I'm talking about marketing work, I'm not talking about people that might work for Total Energies or a brand that are marketing direct to consumers, but organizations which exist just to provide marketing services, like an advertising agency. They don't sell anything other than their advertising abilities to other companies. And I came to realize if you think about what they were doing in terms of really there were no consumers there. They weren't interested particularly in consumers at all. They were interested in how they could sell themselves to their clients. And the example, and I do speak about this in the book, was they had a display wall with interviews with consumers up. But the interviews, they were videos of videoed interviews. They were actually with people that worked at Super. They weren't consumers at all. They were just people pretending to be consumers. And this to me was kind of like a real emblem of their distance from the consumer market and their focus on the clients.
So you talk in the book then about these two different ideas of marketing art and marketing science. And I guess talking to Kevin, we've got a sense of what marketing science might be and marketing knowledge. But perhaps these are more the marketing arts, the arts of persuasion that are circling around the practices of marketing that you examined ethnographically.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my sense was that, when we look back at the history of marketing thought and marketing practice, there's always almost a pendulum swinging between the ideal of marketing being a science and marketing being an art. If you look historically, you've got things like Claude Hopkins, who writes scientific advertising. And then shortly, a few decades later, Bill Bernbach says, no, it's all about being an artist. It's all about going out there and absorbing culture and being productive and creative. And my sense on the ground was that both of those things were true at the same time, but also neither was true. And what I mean by that was that when marketing workers were presenting themselves as scientists, they were usually being incredibly creative. They were usually being very playful, and they were taking the images of science and combining them in a way that was doing the language of persuasion, the dark arts. Equally, when they were being their most artistic, there was usually some kind of, knowledge regime, some kind of practice in there that was actually influencing what they were doing. So yeah, you have these two discourses which are usually treated as being separate, but I found ethnographically, in practice, they were combined and entangled in ways which were very interesting to unpack.
Well, thank you both. Let's bring you both together for a final question. So Kevin's book, of course, gives this broad overview of how sociology considers and indeed should consider marketing, while Robert, your book looks closely at a subset of marketing, that marketing science slice of the industry. So can you both share some final thoughts on how the macro, Robert, might help you understand the micro? Kevin. So Kevin, how does Robert's work expand, challenge, or maybe affirm your review of the field that you've just published?
Yeah, I think Robert's book is really fantastic. First, it offers a rich ethnography, of course, of this market research / advertising agency in the age of big data. It also belongs to a very rich tradition of ethnographic studies, and I think Robert does a fantastic work in situating his own work, but also relating all this tradition and its output in, and it would somehow deserve a chapter or maybe more. So I would say that there is really room for more synthesis on all this work, and I really think. And want to say that I was not aware of all this work, and I think it's very important. And saying more about Robert's work, I would say that his work is really well demonstrating how marketing work is embedded in a specific division of labor, and he does it very brilliantly and very finely. Thus, it is also an important contribution to the sociology of work, echoing Everett Hughes or having Goffman's insight into the social drama of work and the way interaction between professional groups shape organizations and professions. So, yeah. I really loved your book, and I think it's an important contribution and in many ways.
Thank you. Yeah, the dramaturgy of data, as Robert says. That's great. So Robert, similar question, but in reverse. How did Kevin's book help you maybe do the same? So maybe expand the empirical subject of your book a bit broader into the sociology of marketing, and maybe challenge some things that you found or affirm your findings.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to echo in reverse everything Kevin said. I think his book is fantastic and deserves to be widely read, particularly amongst marketing students and marketing academics. The thing that I took away from it, and it's the one of the points I tried to make in my review. And I think it does reflect what I observed on the ground in a marketing company, which is the question as to whether some of what marketers are doing is actually a kind of practical or applied sociology. So as much as sociologists might be thinking about marketing, whether marketers in reality are often thinking a lot more sociologically than we might think. To me, then that opens up the question, should we, in a business school like I am, be teaching our students more sociological methods? We teach them a lot of psychology at the moment. But in reality, what I observed was they're thinking in terms of groups, market segments, the housewife category that Kevin was talking about earlier on. They seem to be working as applied sociologists. And of course, as Kevin really beautifully demonstrates, historically, that's where a lot of the standard tools of marketing have come from, was professional sociologists. And I wonder then, when we start to think about marketers as sociologists, how our thoughts about the morality and ethics of markets might or might not change, because suddenly we might not be thinking about them as these kind of psychological manipulators, but more as social engineers. And I think that brings with it a variety of different questions. So that to me was the thing which when I read Kevin's book and related it to my experience, I just thought, yeah, so much of marketing practice is a form of sociology. And maybe that's one reason why marketers don't want to confront Kevin's work when he goes and presents to them, because they don't want to think about themselves as sociologists for some reason. And quite why, I think Kevin probably would be in a better position than me to talk about.
It is fascinating, actually, when one speaks to practitioners generally, how often we find that they're sociologists in the wild, desperately trying to be economists or psychologists because that's what they've been taught to do in their business school education. And on that point, I think we should leave it. Thank you both. Thanks again to our guests, Kevin Mellet and Robert Cluley, for ending our first podcast season with a fascinating chat about the cultural economic conventions of marketing. Our uncertainty about the topic has been, dare we say, absorbed.
And you've been listening to, or maybe watching, Cultural Economy in the Kitchen from the Journal of Cultural Economy's Editorial Collective. Today's episode was produced by C. Ross Cinematics. Thank you, Charlie. You'll find links to the papers at the end of the video if you're watching on YouTube. And don't worry, we'll be back for season 2 after a short break. So don't forget to like and subscribe, tell your friends, and share. So we'll see you next season. Thank you.
Bye.